Thank you for joining another episode of In Depth with Deon. I have here with me an incredible guest today, Attorney Gerald Griggs, Georgia and Atlanta NAACP President. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Deon. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to have you. I want to get into a few things. Let's start with Fani Willis and the Trump election interference case. So, the judge earlier last week ruled that Fani Willis can stay on, and this week Trump's team has appealed that ruling. So first of all, I just want to get your thoughts on the case and your reactions to their attempts to remove her.
Okay. Well, as I've said many times, I don't think that the effort to remove her is based on precedent in Georgia. And ultimately, the judge ruled that last Friday that they had not proved, one, an actual conflict, and two, it adversely affected the rights of the defendants in the case. So they were unsuccessful. The judge did say, though, that there was an appearance of impropriety and thus ordered either the district attorney to recuse itself or special prosecutor recuse himself. And ultimately, the special prosecutor recused himself and is no longer on the case. And so the judge said the case can now move forward. Then the defendants filed a request for a certificate of immediate review, which is within their rights. The judge granted that, but in his order granting it also indicated that the case would not be stayed unless the Court of Appeals ordered him to stay the case. So basically, they are waiting for a decision from the Court of Appeals, which can take from 30 to 45 days on whether to accept the certificate of immediate review. Again, in pretrial matters in Georgia, you don't have an automatic right to an appeal. So you have to get permission from the judge, and then the Court of Appeals through Rules 30 and 31 have the right to grant it under special circumstances. And I believe in this case, they don't meet the special circumstances. One, it's not a novel issue. Two, it doesn't go to the merits of the overall decision of the case. And three, I don't believe it's right at this point. So there's precedent in Georgia, the Williams case from 1988, and more recently, the Reed case from 2022 from the Georgia Supreme Court have said that you have to prove an actual conflict. The evidence in those prolonged motions hearings did not prove an actual conflict. So I believe one of two things is going to happen. Either in the next 30 to 45 days, the Court of Appeals is going to reject the application and the case will continue, or the Court of Appeals will accept the application on this limited purpose and then reject it through the current standing Georgia law, because the law is clear from the Supreme Court, and the Court of Appeals and the trial court are bound by the decisions of the Supreme Court. So I think that's what's going to happen. I think, again, it's a delay tactic by the defendants, which I understand they need to do that with their case because there seems to be strong evidence that there was a RICO conspiracy to change votes and to affect the outcome of the election in Georgia. So that's my position, and I think that's what's going to happen, and that's based on the Williams case and the Reed case here in Georgia.
I want to back up a little bit for those who may not be familiar with this case at all that Fani Willis has brought against Donald Trump. Can you talk about what she's accusing him of doing when it comes to interfering in the 2020 Georgia elections for president, and if he's found guilty, what will happen, what the convictions will lead to?
Okay, so he's charged with being in a RICO conspiracy to try to overturn the results of the election in Fulton County. Now, there are some overt acts of the conspiracy that reach out to other counties, namely Coffee County and a few other counties, in an attempt to change voting machines and records to flip votes. And so basically he called in to the Secretary of State's office and asked in a recording conversation for them to find 11,780 votes, 80 some odd votes, which is one more than our opponent has to change the election. And so with that, she's charged that was an overt act of conspiracy. So he's charged with 19 others in trying to overturn the election. And if he's convicted, he could spend anywhere from 1 year to over 50 years in prison in Georgia if he's convicted of everything based on the statute ranges for RICO conspiracy charge. So it's a very serious matter. It's a state matter that's being handled by a state prosecutor in Fulton County. And the reason why it's in Fulton County is because Fulton County is the seat, the primary seat of government for the state government here. And so the call was made into Fulton County, which gives Fulton County venue. And the district attorney in Fulton County is Fani Willis. And so she took the case up, presented it to a special purpose grand jury to see if there was sufficient evidence. They recommended proceeding against the 19 defendants. And then she presented it to a criminal grand jury. They indicted them. And now we're here.
So basically, we have a grand jury and a criminal grand jury, two sets of bodies telling her that they believe there's evidence to pursue this case.
Yeah, two sets of citizens. Most grand juries are between 24 to 30 citizens vote, and they have to be a majority vote that there was sufficient evidence, one, to make a recommendation to present it to a criminal grand jury. And then the criminal grand jury found probable cause that a crime had been committed and thus issued an indictment, which followed with warrants for the arrest of the defendants. The defendants were arrested at the Fulton County Jail. They bonded out. Now they're on bond, and we're in the process of getting to a trial. So that's what's happening. And, many places in social media, they were talking about Fani's on trial, and this is not about Fani. It was a motions hearing to disqualify the district attorney. They were unsuccessful, and now they're appealing. But the trial is about Donald Trump and his co-defendants attempting to subvert the will of Fulton County voters.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about this in the framing of this racial backlash that we're experiencing across the nation, because I feel like it kind of epitomizes that in at least some ways. You just explained that two sets of citizens recommended pursuing this case. So this wasn't something that Fani Willis woke up one day and decided, I am coming up for re-election. I want to make a name for myself. These are two sets of grand juries deciding that there's evidence here for criminality, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about the fact that you have a black woman district attorney who is taking on this case against the former president, do you feel like, I feel like, this was a kind of, like you said, this wasn't about the merits of the case, and the judge agreed to that. But it seems like Trump and his teams are trying to find any reason to create this perception, right, that she is unqualified, that she is corrupt. And that is a kind of, it goes back decades when it comes to conservative politicians, right-wing groups trying to paint black political leaders in such a way. Can you talk about your thoughts on that and the reactions on social media to their attempts to try and make this case about Fani Willis?
Yeah, so what's happening is in the arena of conservative media, both mainstream and social media, they are trying to discredit all of the cases. And many of the cases have been brought by African-American lawyers and prosecutors, with the exception of the Jack Smith case, which is the federal case. And so there's a long running trope that black people are not qualified for these positions and thus are inherently corrupt and evil and all these other things. And what people need to understand is all these prosecutors, including the special prosecutor, have sworn an oath to follow the law and follow the facts. And the citizens who have indicted Donald Trump and his co-defendants have found evidence to a probable cause determination to proceed. These particular prosecutors are sworn to uphold justice and follow the law. They're also supposed to follow the will of the people. And so far, the will of the people say that there is evidence that a crime was committed both federally and in the state of Georgia and the state of New York. So the attacks by right wing to discredit are trying to attack the prosecutors when it's actually the system that they're up against. And I'll be the first one to agree. The criminal justice system has not been fair to a large majority of people. But to say that Mr. Trump and his co-defendants are involved in some type of political conspiracy to take him down, no, unless the citizens of Fulton County who were sitting on both grand juries were a part of it, that has nothing to do with this. So what I want people to know is that the process is playing out. Due process is being protected because he has now had more opportunities than any criminal defendant in Fulton County. One, he's free, and two, he had spent not one day in jail. Most of the time in Fulton County, you get indicted on something this serious, you're gonna have to at least spend overnight to get to a first appearance hearing, and then bond will be set. So, these attacks on Ms. Willis personally, these attacks on the prosecutor, both Ms. James and the other prosecutor in New York, are unnecessary. Let the process play itself out. If there is some type of ethical violations with both, the county commission has not found, and now there's a state investigation, that's separate and apart from whether or not this case will continue on its merits. And again, the judge has already ruled that there, one, is no actual conflict, and two, if even there is the specter of a conflict, that the appearance of impropriety, that has been removed by Mr. Wade being removed from the case. So the case will continue on its merits. These attacks by right-wing media and social media are just showing that in our country, there's still a grave problem of racism, and people need to just calm down a little bit, let the process play itself out. If Mr. Trump is in fact not guilty, he will be found not guilty, but he needs to try this case in a courtroom and not in the court of public opinion.
And we've already lost 2 months, right, of progress on this case, just going through the disqualification proceedings,
yes.
Right, which Fani Willis ultimately overcame. Do you still believe that it's, or do you believe at all that it's possible that we could see a trial before the election?
Yes, I believe so. The court has been asked to set a trial date for August. Given the court's ruling on the certificate for immediate review, saying that the court has found precedent to allow the court to continue, shows the court is trying to move this case. So it's very likely this case could still be tried before the election. But what I think Mr. Trump and his supporters need to understand is, regardless if this trial happens before or after the election, he can't pardon himself. So this case is going to continue. Now, the federal cases, if he is elected president of the United States, there's a strong possibility he may pardon himself, which would be a travesty to our criminal justice system, that somebody who's been accused of 91 counts would not go through the process and let the civilians determine guilt or innocence. But that's neither here nor there. But in Georgia, the only group that could pardon this particular allegation, if he's convicted, would be the Board of Pardons and Paroles. So it's not even the governor. So the politics has been removed completely from the Georgia process. And I think people need to understand that this case is going to continue. The determination is whether it's going to be tried before the election or after the election. And if he's convicted in Georgia, he's going to be serving prison time in Georgia. Now, through a quirk in the system, somebody that's a convicted felon can in fact serve as president of the United States. But if they're convicted in Georgia, they'll just be serving from Jackson.
I see. I want to talk about this backlash against DEI, right? We have everyone from Republican governors to Elon Musk talking about the dangers of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. We're seeing right now several states almost as if they've kind of been meeting together to roll this out. These legislative bills targeting DEI in education, to the point where some colleges are having to lay off staff. Students are unsure of what's going to happen, and there is this chilling effect among teachers who are either afraid or unwilling to teach our full history. What are your thoughts about these attacks right now? And where do you feel like this racial backlash, if it is a racial backlash, comes from?
Well, it's coming from the grand reawakening that started in the Black Lives Matter movement. Both iterations, whether you're talking about 2012 to 2016 or the current iteration, which is 2020 now, when there was a great racial awakening and people were having conversations about moving our communities forward in a fashion that is reflective of our actual values. And so I'm actually appreciative that these things are happening because it now gives this generation their 1950s and 1960s moment. The hood has been ripped off. There's no more argument that America's colorblind and we all just need to move forward. There's an attempt to whitewash that's happening right now. And these are the exact things that Dr. King was facing, that Frederick Douglass was facing, that all of our ancestors have been facing. And now it's our turn to fight back. And so I think it's a good reawakening for us, especially the young people, to see unabated racism. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a strength. And that's why the NAACP has, started our position that it's diversity no matter what. So you've seen what we're doing in Florida. You will see what we're going to do in Alabama. We are going to send a message to these states that not on our watch. And for the politicians that want to push this, because that's what's happening. It's politicians pushing this. We'll see you at the ballot box. So we see that the main individual who started the war on woke was sent back to Florida. And eventually he will be unseated in Florida. But people need to understand woke is about being aware of social injustices. And if the way you respond to people awakening to social injustice is more social injustice, you will be remembered just like your grandparents for all of those signs when Ruby Bridges was trying to integrate schools, when the Little Rock individuals were trying to integrate schools, when you had the Greensboro sit-ins. All of those people are remembered for being on the wrong side of history. So for all these politicians that are saying DEI is a problem, we shouldn't have it in medicine, we shouldn't have it in law, we shouldn't have it in business, you will be remembered on the wrong side of history because we have the strength of our ancestors and the education that they fought so hard for on our side, and we will win. So I'm not surprised to see it. What I am surprised is that so many people that in 2020 pledged to push for racial inclusion and push back against discrimination are the very ones that are pushing this. So my question to the corporations who promised during Freedom Summer 2020 to do all these DEI initiatives, where are you now? Because Freedom Summer will kick off again. It started in Georgia with a young unarmed jogger who was killed in Scintilla Shores because the racial tensions in Georgia were far too high. Look what happened to those individuals. They met the response of Georgia, and they met the response of the nation. You will as well if you continue down this path. Black people, people of color, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, all of the individuals that have been subjected to the rise in white supremacy and white racial terror are watching, and they're focused on winning, and they will win like their ancestors.
One thing that I noticed a lot on social media in that there's a lot of debate back and forth. There's these kinds of arguments that come up where it's men versus women, black men versus black women, or the straight black community versus the gay black community, and just things that create division amongst ourselves and other marginalized communities that we would normally be in solidarity with. Do you feel like there are efforts socially to try and cut off that solidarity that we experienced during the Freedom Summer?
I think so. And you have to understand the greatest tool of the people that are fighting against change is to divide and conquer. We have to know that these platforms are algorithms that work on emotion. So all you have to do is stoke a division between communities and then fan that division. So the division that seems to be created between black men and black women. And again, that seems to be bubbling up. You got to remember, man, 75% of African-American men are married to African-American women, and they're raising African-American babies who are, prospering as much as they can in a system that's trying to hold them down. So once you realize when you come off the screen and have an actual conversation with actual people, the divisions are not that great. The division that's supposedly between heterosexual black individuals and people that love differently it's not that big when you come into a conversation with the person and say, hey, I love and you love. We shouldn't be worried about who you're loving. Let's just be love, and that love will permeate through the community. So I just think that people need to understand that we're in the 1950s all over again. We're in the golden age of the internet, just like they were in the golden age of television. We have to determine how we're going to use this tool that's been given to us. We were able to put together the largest protest in the history of this country. I'm going to say that again. The largest protest in the history of this country was in 2020. It was a racially diverse, it was a genderless, it was a religious leaning, non-religious leaning. It was everybody was outside. We can get back to that. And all we have to do is focus not our energy on fighting each other, but focus our energy on the ones that are oppressing. The system is built to divide and conquer. And once we understand that, we can see that maybe the algorithm is stoking this. Maybe it's a provocateur who benefits on clickbait that's stoking this issue. And we can look to organizations that have been doing this for 115 years, how they overcame lynching, how they overcame Jim Crow, how they overcame racial intolerance, how they overcame the issues of discrimination against people that love differently, people that worship differently, people that just want to be different, and all come together. We remember the March on Washington. The March on Washington's chief architect was Baynard Rustin. So how can we look at freedom fighters from a different perspective that are intersectional and say, oh, we can't deal with them? No, we're not doing that. We're not making the same mistakes of our ancestors. So I would just tell people that are on these social platforms to recognize where you're getting your messages from. Study your history, gird yourself up in your history, and get ready for this fight, because we will win this fight. And so for the DEI opponents, you're on the wrong side of history. You can defund all of these institutions that's going to hurt you. Because, Black people, we have HBCUs. We have our own educational system in our home. We've known about this for years. It's nothing new. We know that when somebody wants to talk about something that makes another group of people uncomfortable, we have to teach it at home. So we're going to teach it at home. And we're going to say, see what your granddad was talking about in the 50s? It's happening to you right now. So how did your granddad respond to this? Did he say, oh, woe is me, the sky is falling, nothing will ever change? No. So if we fought Jim Crow, we know how to fight James S. Crow Esquire, because that's all Jim Crow did. Jim Crow grew up and got a law degree and started changing laws. And so now the freedom fighters of the past who listened to Charles Hamilton Houston, who said a lawyer is one of two things. And where did Charles Hamilton Houston teach? Howard. Who did he teach? The world's greatest lawyer, Thurgood Marshall. A lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite. We have more lawyers, Black lawyers, than we've ever had. So we need more social engineers to fight James S. Crow Esquire like we did Jim Crow.
That's a word. I want to touch really quick on Cop City. I want to get an update. So, there has been efforts to push the city council and the mayor to count the votes. I mean, to allow for a public election, right? Can you talk about where we're at on that fight?
What's interesting about that if the petitions had been counted and approved, that election would have been during the presidential primary, and we would have seen more turnout than we saw in the presidential primary. Presidential primary, we had almost 500,000 Georgians show up to vote. Well, I mean, there's 6 million. Actually, there's 7 million registered voters in Georgia. There are 2.5 million registered African Americans. There are 2.1 million that are active. But because of voter suppression tactics and the continued appeal by the city, it was not on the ballot. So I think that the issue is going to come up in the forefront in the 2025 mayoral election of what the city of Atlanta wants to do, because nobody in 2020 marched for more training. They marched for accountability. Again, it's the biggest protest in the history of the country. And so right now there's a stalemate. They are building the public safety training center. We are still in communication with the mayor's office to try to get them to reconsider this, but I think he wants to proceed forward. And, the activists are still outside his home. They're still doing civil disobedience. There is another group that's doing other things. Again, as NAACP, we don't condone violent protests. We condone civil disobedience. So what we would just say in this moment right now is that Atlanta is at a crossroads. Either we're going to be the birthplace of civil rights or we're going to be a police state. I prefer us to continue to be the birthplace of civil rights, and we're going to do everything within our power to prevent that. But right now, it is being built. We stand in solidarity with the families that have been victims to police brutality and police violence in saying that the issue is accountability, not training.
Attorney Griggs, I know you don't have a lot of time. I want to ask you one more question, and I really want to just ask you a personal question. A lot of people, especially here in Oklahoma where I am, a lot of people are getting disheartened. They're getting numb, right, to the constant rhetoric and the bills and just the climate. What do you do to just kind of, mentally debrief from everything and get yourself to a point where you're still pouring into yourself so that you can continue to be in this fight?
Good question. I read. I study my ancestors. This is a great book. This is Alabama versus King. Many don't know that Dr. King was indicted with the others in the bus boycott for basically a RICO conspiracy. So once you understand the tactics, you can understand how to fight back. And as bad as it is right now, it was nowhere near what it was during Bus Ride to Freedom, where a lawyer was indicted. So when people say they're getting tired, I start looking to my ancestors. That's why I tell people it's important to study history. I look to Fani Willis. I look to a young field organizer in the NAACP that was shot outside of his home in front of his children. His name was Medgar Evers. So until you have suffered to that point, you don't have the right to be numb because they want you to become numb. They want this to be normalized, but it is not normal. I look to a slave in Maryland who got so tired that he fought his slave driver, took the whip from him and ran for freedom, and then came back with the big hair and a lot of beautiful rhetoric, and his name was Frederick Douglass. So if Frederick Douglass had the temerity to stand up in a room full of non-melanated folks and say, what is the 4th of July to a slave? How dare you say you're tired, you're numb? Why is this continuing to happen? You got to understand, we're on a continuum. We've been in a fight for 400 years. I think in the 80s, somehow we got rocked to sleep that the fight was over. Well, the fight was not over, and the fight is here. And the question that you got to ask yourself is, what are your grandkids going to say that you did during this iteration of the fight? You see what we say about our grandparents? They were fighters. I mean, all you got to do is pull up the pictures from the 50s and the 60s. Some of them were nonviolent Kingian fighters. Some were brothers for the Black Panthers who believed in self-defense. Some of them were radical Muslims who believed in self-defense and other things. And then some of them were just sick and tired of being sick and tired. You fall in one of those categories. Now, all you got to do is find your foreparent, dust off the playbook, and get in the game. And so, as far as me, Dr. King and Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston are my North Star. As long as I'm looking at that North Star, I understand, we've been through this before. We've been through far worse. So whether it's a politician in Oklahoma or Florida or Georgia, if they want to act like George Wallace, we're going to treat them like George Wallace. If they want to be Bull Connor, we're going to treat them like Bull Connor. Because in the end, What happened to George Wallace? He had to apologize for his racial temerity to try to destroy all things black, because there was a young lawyer in Alabama that said his whole goal was to destroy everything segregation. He did that. Now there should be a bunch of lawyers saying our goal is to destroy everything white supremacy.
I mean, that's it. You just gave the blueprint.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say some days don't get hard, but I have children. I don't want my child to grow up in a country where she has less rights than her mother. I have a son that's on the way. I don't want the last person in my family, which was the first person in my family to be born with all their rights, to be the last person. I was born in 1978. I'm the first person in my family to have all my rights. First person.
Wow.
But now I'm bringing a son into this world who, if we continue to go down this road, would not have any of his rights. So what kind of parent would I be if I didn't do what was necessary to protect my descendants? So we can always say we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. That's great. Let's also be our descendants' wildest dreams as well.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, Attorney Griggs, I appreciate your time, and I'll be staying closely, following what's going on in Georgia, and I'll just be praying that everything is going in the line of justice, and let's definitely stay connected.
I appreciate you. It will. Great Georgian once said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Well, we're the hip hop generation, so we're gonna remix it. The moral arc of the universe is long, but we bend it toward justice. We will do that in Georgia, and we will be the blueprint to the rest of the country.
That's it. Thank you so much for joining In Depth with Deon.